Hello student, today I am going to explain you the chapter A Visit to Cambridge. Before starting the chapter, we will read this paragraph. This is the story of a meeting between two extraordinary people, both of them disabled or differently able, as we now say. This chapter is a meeting of two extraordinary people, and both the people are differently able. First is Stephen Hawking is one of the greatest scientists of our time. He suffered from a form of paralysis that confines him to a wheelchair and allows him to speak only by punching buttons on a computer, which speaks for him in a machine-like voice. Kanga is a writer and journalist who lives and works in Mumbai. Kanga was born with brittle bones that tended to break easily when he was a child. Brittle bone is a very rare disease in which the bones are very weak and break very easily. So, Kanga spent most of his childhood in a wheelchair. Like Hawking, Kanga moves around in a wheelchair. The two great men exchange thoughts on what it means to live life in a wheelchair and on how the so-called normal people react to the disabled. And in this chapter, both these disabled people exchange their thought with each other and how the normal people behave or react to the disabled. Now we will read the chapter and we will find out the conversation between Kanga and Stephen Hawking. Now let's start the chapter. Cambridge was my metaphor for England. My is Kanga. Kanga is saying, when he thought about England, he thought about only Cambridge. And it was strange that when I left it, had become altogether something else. But when Kanga left England, his thinking was changed because I had met Stephen Hawking there. Because Kanga was met Stephen Hawking there. It was a walking tour through Cambridge that the guide mentioned Stephen Hawking, poor man, who is quite disabled now, though he is a worthy successor of Isaac Newton, whose chair he has at the university. When Kanga was on a tour of Cambridge, his guide mentioned Stephen Hawking and said he was a poor man now because at the time he was quite disabled, although he was a worthy successor of Isaac Newton. He was an able successor of Isaac Newton, means he was the only who can take the seat of Isaac Newton. He was at the university on the chair of Isaac Newton. And I started because I had quite forgotten that this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist, the author of A Brief History of Time, one of the biggest bestsellers ever, lived here. When the walking tour was done, I rushed to a phone booth and almost tearing the cord so it could reach me outside, phoned Stephen Hawking's house. And after the walking tour, the writer Kanga rushed to the telephone booth, tore the cord to phone to Stephen Hawking's house. There was his assistant on the line, and I told him I had come in a wheelchair from India. Now the writer informed the assistant of Stephen Hawking that he came from India in a wheelchair. Perhaps he thought I had propelled myself all the way to write about my travels in Britain, and he informed the assistant of Stephen Hawking that he came from India to write about his travels in Britain. I had to see Professor Hawking, even 10 minutes would do, and the writer informed the assistant that he wanted only 10 minutes of Professor Hawking. Half an hour, he said, from 3:30 to 4, but the assistant gave him the time of half an hour from 3:30 to 4. And suddenly I felt weak all over. And after that, the writer was feeling weak. Growing up disabled, you get fed up with people. In this line, the writer wants to say that when you are disabled, people always said to you to be brave, and you fed up with the people, as if you have a courage account on which you are too lazy to draw a check, and it feels like that you have a courage account and you did not want to draw a check from that account. The only thing that makes you stronger is seeing someone like you. And the writer want to say that only thing which makes you stronger is when you saw a person, someone like you, achieving something huge, and that person achieving something huge means big in his life. Then you know how much is possible, and you reach out further than you ever thought you could. I haven't been brave, said his disembodied computer voice the next afternoon. The writer is saying when the next afternoon he met Stephen Hawking, the embodied voice, because Stephen Hawking talked with the help of a computer. The computer voice said, I haven't been brave. I have had no choice. But he had no choice. Maybe the writer asked him some question, and the Stephen Hawking answered that he had not been brave, but he had no choice. Surely I wanted to say, living creatively with the reality of his disintegrated body was a choice. And the writer want to say that disintegrated means the body which was becoming weak day by day. And the writer want to say that living with that disintegrated body was a choice. But I kept quiet because I felt guilty every time I spoke to him. But the writer was quiet because he was feeling guilty whenever he was asking any question to Hawkins, because forcing him to respond. There he was tapping at the little switch in his hand, trying to find the words on his computer with the only bit of movement left to him, his long pale fingers, because the writer was thinking Stephen Hawking's doing very hard work to type a letter on the computer with his pale fingers. Every so often, his eyes would shut in frustrated exhaustion, and sometimes Stephen Hawking closed his eyes with frustrated exhaustion means tiredness. He was feeling tired. And sitting opposite him, I could feel his anguish, the mind beyond with thoughts that came out in frozen phrases and sentences stiff as corpses. And the writer want to say he was sitting opposite to Stephen Hawking and he was feeling his anguishment, anger, and he was feeling the mind beyond. Beyond means his active mind or active thoughts which are coming out from his mind like a frozen phrases and sentences, and they were stiff like corpse. Corpse means the dead body. Because Stephen Hawking was unable to speak or move his body, a lot of people seem to think that disabled people are chronically unhappy. I said, I know that's not true myself. Are you often laughing inside? Now the writer asked Stephen Hawking, a lot of people thought about disabled people that they are unhappy people. And the writer said that he knew that it was not true. And he asked Stephen Hawking, was he often laughed inside? After this question, Stephen Hawking responded after 3 minutes, I find it amusing when people patronize me. Patronize means thought that he was lower than him. And do you find it annoying when someone like me comes and disturbs you in your work? And the writer asked Mr. Stephen Hawking that it was annoying for him when someone like him came and disturbed him in his work. The answer flashed yes. Stephen Hawking said yes. Then he smiled, his one-way smile, and I knew without being sentimental or silly that I was looking at one of the most beautiful men in the world. Mr. Hawking smiled and he said it was the most beautiful smile in the world and that man is the most beautiful man in the world. A first glimpse of him is shocking because he is like a still photograph, as if all those pictures of him in magazines and newspapers have turned three-dimensional because he was like a still photograph. As we saw in the newspaper or magazine, only three-dimensional he looked in reality. When you see the head twisted sideways into a slump, the writer is telling the position of his body. The head of Mr. Hawking was fell sideways. The torso shrunk inside the pale blue shirt. Torso means the upper part of the body is also shrunk inside the pale blue shirt. The wasted legs, and wasted legs means the legs were also not working. The legs were also not working. You look at his eyes, which can speak. The writer is saying only his eyes could speak still, and they are saying something huge and urgent, and his eyes want to say something big and very urgent. It is hard to tell what, but it is very hard what they want to say. But you are shaken because you have seen something you never thought could be seen. The writer want to say that He was shaken because he had seen something that he never thought he could be seen. This is the first part of our chapter. Next part we will cover in our next video.